The predator cub's arrival was supposed to be a carefully orchestrated event, complete with containment fields, tranquilizer protocols, and an entire team of xenobiologists observing from behind reinforced barriers. Instead, what happened looked like the punchline of an old spacer's joke. The cub, a scaled, four-limbed creature with eyes too bright and teeth too sharp, had been carried in by armored handlers. The whole research bay buzzed with nervous energy, the hum of the stasis cage echoing faintly. No one breathed too loudly. No one dared move too quickly. After all, this was the offspring of a species known to dismember battle drones for sport. Yet somehow, impossibly, within 5 minutes of being set inside the examination chamber, the cub had wriggled its way out of the containment field, padded across the sterile floor, and leapt directly into the lap of Mira Raines, the one human present in the room. She wasn't even supposed to be near the test floor. Mira was a systems technician, not a xenobiologist. She'd been crouched against the far wall, busy recalibrating the data feed, when the cub scampered across the floor. By the time she looked up, it was already scrambling onto her legs with startling agility. Everyone froze. The armored handlers stared as though their careers had just ended. The xenobiologists stood stiff as statues, tablets clutched in sweaty hands. Even Chancellor Erevic, who had come to personally observe this critical study, tilted his angular head, mandibles twitching in what might have been alarm or disbelief. And Mira? Mira blinked down at the creature. "Well," she said slowly, as the cub curled against her stomach with a soft huff of breath. "This isn't in the manual." The cub made a low, trilling sound that vibrated against her. Its scales shifted in color, something between contentment and drowsiness, if the research notes she'd skimmed earlier were accurate. The silence dragged on until someone coughed. Then another voice, strained and high-pitched, broke in. "Restrain it! Get it off the human before it—" But the warning cut short when the cub yawned. Its tiny, dagger-sharp teeth flashed, then vanished as it tucked its head beneath Myra's arm. The predator offspring, the apex terror of half the known colonies, had fallen asleep. On her lap. Mira exhaled through her nose, half exasperated and half bewildered. So much for containment protocols. The chamber exploded with noise. "Do something! It's imprinting! This compromises the entire study." The voices overlapped, bouncing off the steel walls, every scientist trying to be the loudest in their panic. Mira held her ground, shifting slightly so the cub wouldn't slip. Her instincts screamed at her to stay still, but her engineer's brain couldn't help noting the absurdity of it all. Here she was, unarmed, with a creature that could likely bite through bone, and it was purring. Her eyes flicked to Chancellor Erevic, who still hadn't spoken. His gaze was locked on her, calculating, his mandibles flexing like he was chewing over a particularly bitter problem. Finally, he raised one clawed hand, silencing the room. "Explain." His voice carried the authority of someone unaccustomed to being questioned. Mira raised an eyebrow. "Explain what, exactly?" "I was tightening a cable, minding my own business, and your apex predator decided I make a good mattress." Gasps rippled through the scientists at her irreverence. No one talked back to the Chancellor. Erevic narrowed his eyes. "You are a systems mechanic, not an experimental subject. Yet the cub chose you. Why?" "I don't know," Mira admitted. She looked down at the cub. Its breathing had already deepened, the rise and fall of its chest rhythmic, its talons relaxed against her jacket fabric. "Maybe it likes warm laps. Maybe it's got bad taste in friends. Or," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, "maybe it's not as simple as you thought." That earned her another round of scandalized whispers. Erevic's mandibles clicked. "The cub was meant to be observed under stress conditions, to evaluate instinctive responses. This anomaly undermines everything. It must be corrected." "Corrected?" Mira repeated sharply. "Remove it," Erevic ordered the handlers. The armored pair exchanged nervous glances. Neither moved. The cub stirred faintly at the sound of the Chancellor's voice, one eyelid cracking open. Mira felt the shift in its body, tense, alert. Without thinking, she laid a steadying hand across its back, whispering softly, "Sure. It's all right." The cub's muscles eased, its eye drifting closed again. The handlers took one step forward. The cub growled low, vibrating against her ribs. Mira shot them a glare. "You touch it, you'll spook it. And then we'll see just how fast those containment protocols work." The handlers froze again. Around the chamber, the air thickened with unease. No one had expected this outcome. No one had planned for it. And Mira, unqualified, uninvited Mira, was suddenly at the center of an experiment that might undo decades of fear and policy. She let her gaze sweep across the room. "Look, I don't know what your study was supposed to prove. But maybe what just happened is worth more than whatever you planned. It came to me. It chose. Don't tell me that's meaningless." A scientist sputtered. "It's an aberration. Predators don't bond." "Really?" Mira tilted her chin toward the cub nestled against her chest. "Tell that to this little guy." Laughter, nervous, incredulous, broke out at the back of the chamber. Quickly stifled, but enough to crack the tension. Ervik's gaze never wavered. "If it bonds with a human, it becomes unpredictable. Dangerous. It could compromise security across every colony. Or," Mira countered, "it could prove they're capable of more than violence. You wanted data? Well, you just got some. Maybe not the kind you wanted, but it's still data." The cub snored softly, as if punctuating her argument. The silence that followed stretched long. Finally, Ervik's claws tapped against the podium in irritation. "We will adjourn. The human remains under observation until this situation is resolved." Mira rolled her eyes but said nothing. She had the distinct feeling that she'd just been volunteered as part of the experiment whether she liked it or not. As the chamber emptied, she stayed seated, the cub still sprawled across her lap. She studied its scales up close, noticing tiny ridges she hadn't before, the way they shifted faintly in color with each breath. Up close, it didn't look like a monster. It looked like a child. A terrifying child with teeth that could shred steel, sure. But still, just a child. She sighed. "What have you gotten me into, little one?" The cub purred again, unconcerned with the weight of galactic politics pressing in on them. By the time the handlers returned with a containment carrier, Mira had made up her mind. Whatever the Chancellor decided, whatever the scientists demanded, she wasn't about to let them treat the cub like a weapon, or worse, a thing. She'd seen something in its eyes before it curled against her: recognition. Trust. And if she was the only human crazy enough to protect that spark, so be it. The cub wasn't supposed to leave the containment pen. That was the first rule hammered into every researcher on site. And yet there it was, curled up in Sam's lap like a house cat, its long claws sheathed, its spiked tail lazily thumping against the floor. "Do you realize," hissed Dr. Trexel, scales flashing pale in agitation, "that a juvenile from that species could tear you in half with one swipe?" Sam only shrugged, keeping his voice calm. "And do you realize he just fell asleep?" A ripple of murmurs passed through the observation deck. Aliens from 7 species had crowded the upper level to witness what they assumed would be another routine study of aggression patterns. Instead, they were staring at a scene that looked more like a pet adoption gone wrong. The cub shifted, snuffling softly against Sam's shirt, then gave a satisfied growl, low, almost like a cat's purr. Sam absent-mindedly scratched behind its ear spines. The creature relaxed further. "Impossible," whispered one of the Cloran guards. "They do not purr. That species knows no comfort but blood." But Sam had already tuned out the fear. He was focused on the cub's breathing, the gentle rise and fall against his chest. A memory tugged at the corner of his mind, his old dog, back on Earth, who used to do the exact same thing after a long day of running around the yard. The parallels were too strong to ignore. He looked up. "You all think he's a weapon," he said quietly. "But he's a kid. A scared kid." Dr. Trexel clicked her mandibles sharply. "That kid slaughtered 3 armored handlers before we got him in restraints. Handlers who treated him like a monster." Sam shot back, his voice sharper than intended. The silence afterward was heavy, filled only with the steady rumble of the cub's resting breaths. Sam wasn't stupid. He knew the cub could turn on him in an instant. He knew those claws weren't ornamental and that its bite could sever him clean through. But he also knew fear when he saw it. This wasn't aggression, it was survival, raw and desperate. And maybe, just maybe, the cub had seen something in him. He gently brushed his fingers along the creature's muzzle. The cub stirred but didn't lash out. Instead, it let out a deep sigh, the kind that carried exhaustion, like a child who had cried too much and finally collapsed. The aliens watching leaned forward, disbelief widening every pair of eyes. "Note this down," muttered one of the observers. "The predator exhibits docile bonding behavior, exclusively with the human subject." Sam smirked faintly. Figures. But things didn't stay peaceful for long. The next day, the cub's test schedule resumed. The research team wanted to probe aggression triggers, loud noises, flashing lights, mechanical dummies shaped like prey animals. Sam argued against it, but his protests carried little weight in a council where humans were still considered newcomers, barely tolerated guests. He was ordered to stand behind reinforced glass while the cub was subjected to stressors. The first test began with sonic pulses. The cub stiffened immediately, its back arching, tail spines flaring. A guttural roar shook the chamber. Sam slammed his fist against the glass. "Turn it off! You're scaring him!" No one moved. The cub charged the sound emitters, ripping them free with terrifying strength. Its eyes, burning gold, flicked toward the observation deck. The researchers flinched. One even drew a sidearm. Sam's voice thundered over the calm. "Don't you dare!" The cub's gaze landed on Sam. For one heartbeat, the predator trembled on the edge between attack and retreat. Then, with a shuddering growl, it backed away, pressing itself against the far corner of the chamber, eyes still locked on the human. The council chamber erupted in debate. "He responds to the human. This is conditioning. This proves the bond hypothesis." Sam ignored the noise. He kept his eyes on the cub, voice low, steady, carrying through the speakers. "You're okay. You're safe. I've got you." The cub stilled. Later, in private quarters, Dr. Trexel cornered Sam. Her voice was cold, calculated. "You do realize what you've done? You've disrupted months of control experiments. That thing should hate you. Instead it—" She paused, mandibles clicking. "Trusts you. Maybe trust isn't what you should be afraid of," Sam said softly. Her slit pupils narrowed. "Or maybe it's exactly what we should be afraid of." Night fell, but Sam barely slept. The cub was transferred to a reinforced habitat, but it wouldn't settle. Through the security feed, Sam saw it pacing endlessly, snarling whenever alien handlers approached. Only when Sam entered the enclosure the next morning did the cub finally calm, bounding toward him with surprising speed. The guards panicked, claws on triggers, but instead of attacking, the cub pressed its forehead against Sam's chest with a heavy thump. The impact nearly knocked him over. "You missed me, huh?" Sam murmured, running his fingers along the creature's armored scales. The cub growled low again, the same strange, not quite purr sound. Sam sat down right there on the cold floor, ignoring the horrified stares from above. The cub circled once, then flopped against him, pinning his legs with its heavy bulk. It was official. The most feared predator in the quadrant had chosen its human. And the galaxy wasn't ready for what that meant. The council chamber was supposed to be a place of logic, structure, and order. Instead, it was chaos, alien voices overlapping in heated shrieks, translators struggling to keep up, holograms flickering from overuse. And at the center of it all, the predator cub sat happily in Daniel's lap, purring with a sound that didn't belong to predators at all but to something entirely trusting. Every time Daniel scratched behind its ears, the creature leaned closer, utterly ignoring the glares of alien scholars who saw years of assumptions crumbling before their eyes. What unsettled them wasn't just that the cub tolerated the human. It was that it had chosen him. One Kalari scientist slammed his clawed hand against the table. This is manipulation. The predator species we study do not bond this way. They respond only to dominance or bloodlines. His frill pulsed red with anger. How can it be that a human, an outsider to this world, an outsider to its ecosystem, has been accepted without a challenge? Daniel, calm as always, shrugged. Maybe you've been studying them wrong. The room went still. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't postured, hadn't declared himself a conqueror. But somehow his words landed with the weight of a challenge. Wrong? Hissed a scholar from the crystalline world of Thursia, her translucent form quivering with offense. We have dedicated lifetimes to their behavior. We know their feeding rituals, their hierarchies, their hunts. What could you possibly understand about them that we do not? Daniel looked down at the cub, which had just curled up against his chest like a child seeking comfort. I understand that creatures aren't puzzles to be solved. They're lives. And lives don't fit neatly into charts and categories. The cub yawned, exposing teeth sharp enough to split bone, but it made no move to bite him. Instead, it pressed its head under his chin. Daniel smiled. See? This isn't about dominance. It's about trust. A murmur spread through the chamber, and not all of it was disbelief. A few species shifted uncomfortably, as if the idea of trust, so alien to predator-prey dynamics, was more unsettling than the teeth themselves. But others weren't ready to concede. You're anthropomorphizing, spat a saurobiologist, his 4 eye stalks recoiling. Assigning your primitive human instincts of care and empathy to a beast that knows only hunger. It does not love you. It cannot. Daniel's gaze sharpened. Maybe it doesn't. But it doesn't fear me either. Isn't that worth studying? That silenced even the most vocal critics, if only for a heartbeat. But silence in a council chamber is never permanent. A new wave of voices rose, this one more dangerous than the last. If the predator accepts humans, a voice rumbled from the corner, deep and gravelly, belonging to a Varan general clad in ceremonial armor. Then perhaps humans are not harmless. Perhaps you are predators yourselves. The accusation hung in the air like a blade. All eyes turned toward Daniel. For most species, to be called a predator was to be feared, condemned, even exiled from civilized company. Predators were studied, caged, contained, never trusted. And now the implication was clear. If the cub's acceptance proved humans shared some hidden kinship with predators, then Earth itself might face the same fate. Daniel could feel the tension spike. The cub, sensing it too, lifted its head and growled low, not at him, but at the aliens circling with suspicion. Instinctively, his hand soothed it, rubbing its back until the growl softened. When he finally spoke, his words were quiet but carried through the chamber. You're right. Humans are predators. But you misunderstand what that means. He leaned forward, his eyes sweeping across the council. Predators don't just kill. They protect. They provide. They fight, yes, but not always for hunger. Sometimes for family. Sometimes for a cause. Sometimes for each other. That's what you've missed. The silence this time was heavier, deeper, filled with unease. Some aliens bristled. Others avoided his gaze. And some, just a few, looked at him with something that might have been respect. The Kalari slammed the table again. Dangerous rhetoric! Humans should not be allowed near the predators again. The experiment is compromised. Remove the cub from his custody immediately. At once, guards stepped forward. But before they could reach him, the cub snarled, a sound so primal that the chamber's walls seemed to vibrate with it. It leapt down from Daniel's lap, claws extended, teeth bared, placing itself between him and the guards. Every guard froze. The entire chamber erupted in gasps and panicked cries. The cub, descendant of a species feared across sectors, apex predator of its homeworld, wasn't protecting its kind. It was protecting a human. Daniel didn't move, didn't smile, didn't taunt. He simply placed his hand gently on the cub's head. It calmed instantly, as if his touch had flipped a switch. The guard stepped back, uncertain, unwilling to risk testing the bond. This, Daniel said, voice steady, is what you're afraid of. Not the cub. Not humans. But the idea that your rules don't explain everything. That maybe trust, empathy, and choice are stronger than fear. The council chamber quaked with divided voices, some calling for immediate expulsion of humans, others demanding a reevaluation of predator studies, and still others whispering dangerous new thoughts about alliances and possibilities. Daniel rose, the cub at his side like a silent shadow. His presence didn't radiate dominance, yet the room shifted around him all the same. For the first time, scholars, soldiers, and leaders alike were forced to confront a possibility they had ignored. Humans didn't need to conquer to command respect. They just needed to sit down, offer a lap, and let trust do the rest. But Daniel knew this wasn't the end. If anything, it was only the beginning. The cub's choice had drawn a line across the galaxy, and one way or another, humanity was now part of it. The predator cub didn't just climb into the human's lap, it stayed there, as if it had chosen its guardian and was never going to be pried away. For weeks the alien research station became less of a sterile laboratory and more of a battleground of opinions. High-ranking scholars argued that the cub should be placed back in controlled isolation. Others whispered about fear, about what it meant that the apex predator, the one every species avoided, was curling up in the lap of a human like a docile companion animal. But Lena didn't care for politics. She only cared for the way the cub's breathing slowed when she hummed Earth lullabies, how it tucked its massive paws under itself like a domestic cat, and how, when startled, it didn't bare its fangs at her but pressed tighter against her. She named it Shadow. That name traveled through the halls like wildfire. Suddenly it wasn't Specimen 13. It was Shadow, the predator that chose a human. And the station couldn't contain the growing implications. Delegates from across sectors arrived. They wanted proof. So Lena agreed to a demonstration. The entire hall brimmed with alien dignitaries, their scales, feathers, and luminous hides reflecting the sharp glow of overhead lamps. The cub was released at the far end of the chamber. Gasps rippled when Shadow bounded forward, claws clicking on the metal. The dignitaries expected carnage. They expected blood. Instead, Shadow leapt into Lena's lap, pressing its head against her chest as she scratched the ridge above its ears. The hall fell into stunned silence. "Impossible!" hissed a scaled ambassador. "Predators recognize no master. They recognize trust," Lena replied evenly. "They recognize who sees them not as tools, not as weapons, but as something more." That phrase, something more, became the seed of a revolution. Other predator species were tested. Carefully. Cautiously. Yet again and again, when a human was present, calm, patient, fearless, the predators showed restraint, even affection. It was as though humans carried some invisible language of survival, a resonance etched into their very bones from Earth's brutal crucible. The council that once dismissed Earth now convened emergency sessions. Policies shifted. The balance of power tilted. Suddenly, humanity wasn't the fragile new species on the galactic stage. They were the bridge to every predator others had failed to tame. Months later, Lena walked through the central plaza of the station, Shadow padding at her side, fully grown now, towering and sleek with rippling muscle under its dark fur. Aliens stepped aside, not out of fear, but awe. For Shadow walked in peace because a human had taught it peace. Whispers spread across the galaxy. If predators bow to humans, what else might they reshape? Lena paused, her hand resting against Shadow's neck. She smiled faintly, not at the politics, not at the rising human influence, but at the simple truth that had begun all of this. A predator cub had chosen her. And she had chosen it back. Sometimes revolutions don't start with wars. Sometimes they start with a lap, a lullaby, and the courage to reach out without fear. And across the stars, every species now knew, humans were no longer just participants in the galaxy. They were the ones who made predators purr. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to the Void Narratives, because in this galaxy, every story is just the beginning.